Phenomenal introspection is reliable and proves that util is true. Sinababu writes, history offers examples of disagreement, ethnicities, classes, and gender. Widespread error reduces the probability that my beliefs are true. Even if I have no direct ev of error, induction suggests they are rife with error. Our epistemic situation forces us to abandon more beliefs. Phenomenal introspection is reliable. Experience is rich in detail. Vision sometimes produces false beliefs. It's so reliable as to be indispensable. When looking at a lemon, one can form beliefs that they're bright. When considering pleasure, one can make judgments that they're good. The parallel between yellow's brightness and pleasure's goodness demonstrates objectivity. I can know others' pleasure is good. That supports util. Thus, the standard is maximizing happiness. For the standard, first, reductionism. Personal identity doesn't exist. Alsin. If your cerebrum were transplanted, the recipient would be you. If you destroy one hemisphere and transplant the other, the one who got the transplant would be you. Suppose both hemispheres are transplanted, each into a different empty head. The two recipients would each be you. But that cannot be. One thing cannot be two things. A contradiction. And this means consequentialism. Moral theories can't focus on individuals since there's nothing that unifies them across time. Only states of affairs can have value. Second, determinism is true. Our bodies are controlled by biological principles only. There's no room for free will. Drescher. Mechanical principles that govern each particle of our body specify how each of these particles behave, which specify how each of us behave. There is no room for the ghost-like component. It would have to do so to make some of the particles violate the principles that all particles are always observed to obey. How can we reconcile the mind with the mechanical nature of the body? Any nudging would constitute a change in probability distribution, and even that would break the rules that particles seem to obey. The rules are exceptionless. And only consequentialism is consistent with determinism. Green and Cohen. The consequentialist approach works with hard determinism. Consequentialists are not concerned with whether anyone is innocent or guilty, but with the likely effects of punishment. The retributivist approach is regarded as requiring free will. Hard determinism implies that no one deserves to be punished. Third, only consequentialism can explain why some moral obligations are stronger than others. Sinna Armstrong. If I promise to meet friends for a casual lunch, my moral obligation is not as strong as when I promise to drive you to the airport to catch an important flight. If I break the lunch promise, not much will happen. If I break the driving promise, my failure will cause more harm. These harmful consequences give strength to my moral obligation to keep this promise. Thus, the NC framework answers the wrong question. Even if you justify what makes an action right or wrong, the distinct feature between levels of rightness and wrongness is consequences. Contention 1 is inequality. UBI solves income inequality by redistributing wealth, increasing innovation and education access, and giving the poor political power. Santon 16. Basic income would function as an income distribution, reducing extreme levels of inequality. This would redistribute from the top 20% to the bottom 60%. A recent macroeconomic model showed food stamps having the greatest stimulus effect, also the greatest stabilizing effects. Giving money to the rich slows the economy, while giving money to the poor grows it. One notable effect of basic income is the increase in numbers of people starting businesses. People use the cash given to them to increase their labor market incomes. This decreases inequality even further. Teenagers chose to reduce their hours worked. Graduation rates made 100%. Education is almost universally thought as a means of increasing wealth. More people choosing to pursue that education would likely result in further reduced inequality. Basic income would enable citizens to outspend even the rich in a small donation by transferring political power concentrated at the top to the wealth and income spectrums back to the great majority of people. And unemployment and rampant inequality is inevitable due to robots. There's only a risk that the apple solves. Straubhaar 17. One of the strongest tailwinds for a UBI comes from a rapid technological change. The development of robotics may result in substitution of the human labor force. A large part of the work now done could be taken over. Jobs will be lost. It remains uncertain how many new jobs will be created. Technological change may result in increased inequality and a stronger polarization between capital owners and the labor force. Scenario A is economy. Income inequality is the most important term linked to economic decline and also causes political instability. Harkinson 11. Comparing world econ, Bergs found equality of incomes was the most important factor in preventing downturn. Making distribution 10% more equitable prolongs growth 50%. The Depression-era chairman of the Federal Reserve blamed the great crash on the wealth gap. Wages grew too little the past 30 years to sustain econ income. Inequality goes with political instability as we've seen during the Arab Spring. And UBI jumpstarts the economic activity out of big cities. Hybert 14. Basic income would need to be a federal benefit. A national benefit that everyone is entitled to regardless of location can actually help even out economic activity across the country. With basic income, people don't have to crowd around the same big expensive cities where most of the present-day jobs are. They can use this benefit to start new economies someplace else. And the United States is key to the global economy. Growth solves many existential threats. Haas 13. The most critical threat is the slow economic growth, the foundation of American power. U.S. economy accounts for 1/4 of global output. Only the U.S. has the potential to drive economic recovery. The need to halt WMD, fight climate change, improve global health, and prevent conflicts will not sort themselves out. Order requires leadership. The U.S. must put its house in order. The alternative is a world characterized by conflict for the planet. Scenario B is the environment. Income inequality kills business. Compliance with international environmental agreements, which are uniquely key to solve global warming. Wilkinson and Pickett 10. Equal societies are greener. Community life is stronger and people trust each other more. People do things for public benefit. Data from the World Economic Forum shows business leaders in equal countries regard complying with international environmental agreements as more important. Believing it is important to comply is essential to the world to respond to climate change. And independently, UBI is key to reorienting society towards environmental protection. Battistoni 14. In providing an alternative to dependence on destructive industries and removing the threat of job blackmail, it makes change a real option, giving workers and communities more power to demand protections against environmental harms. It can start to reorient social focus away from the eternal game of consumption. Viewed as a bulwark linking unconditional livelihood provision to sustainability, it can be the beginning of a much larger project of ensuring decent standards of living for all. While reclaiming environmental commons from the false narrative of tragedy, Hart suggested the need to develop a politics of the common, recognize the limit of the earth, and fosters our unlimited creative capacities. And warming is real, anthropogenic, and causes extinction. Jamal 15. 50 million years ago, a 5 degrees Celsius rise occurred in just 13 years. Earth's climate will change 10 times faster. The Permian mass extinction was triggered by an increase in temperature. Scientific evidence strongly suggests we're in the midst of the same process, anthropogenic and happening exponentially faster. It could happen far more quickly than generally believed possible in the next few decades. And this turns any freedom-based NC. Global warming is an infringement on property rights. Brunig 11. Accept property rights premise. Once individuals become owners, nobody can touch that property. Industrial processes have externalities that put things into the air that make their way into the bodies of others. This is rights infringing. Under the procedure-focused account, industry is causing matter to land on me. I never contracted with them. With climate change, emissions cause the world to warm, which will damage property all over the world. Yet emitters have not contracted with every property owner, making emissions a violation of property rights. No freedom can ever justify pollution of burning fuels. They are ethical equivalent of punching someone in the face. Thus Cypher.
Okay, you read everything?
Yep.
Okay. When you're good.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Sinababu. Sinababu says that phenomenal introspection proves that we find our own pleasure valuable. Is pleasure the only thing that's valuable?
Yes, according to the Sinababu evidence. It's the only thing that's intrinsically valuable.
Why does the fact that we value our own pleasure mean that there can't be another intrinsic good?
Look, this is the AF stance. You're welcome to read
arguments.
No,
yeah, I understand that's what the AF stance is, but I'm asking where the justifications are in the evidence.
The Sinababu evidence explains...
No, so I see why the Sinababu evidence explains that we do care about
Let's just make this clear. If you read an NC that says something else is valuable and you link it into Sinababu, I will attack that link. I did not preempt every other possible valuable good in the Sinababu evidence.
Okay, that's fine. Is Olson just a hypothetical experiment?
No, the hemispherectomy is actually possible in the real world too.
Okay. Why does the fact that there's a possibility of lack of continuity in personal identity mean that there's no personal identity at all? Like the fact that there could be some sort of disjunct between.
It's a thought experiment, right? It proves that the idea that we're unified people is wrong, because if you take that idea to its logical extent, that would imply that we're two people, which makes no sense.
Why would it imply that we're two people?
Yeah, so that's the Olson evidence says that if you were to take someone's brain and split it into two halves, you would have two separate conscious people that were viewing the world differently than each other. But it's impossible that two things could be contained in one thing like that.
Okay, that's fine. Let's talk about the Drescher card. If our bodies are only controlled by biological principles, how do we have the ability to choose to do or not to do the resolution?
We don't. We're guided by. There can still be an ought statement that guides us, right? But inevitably, the way it goes is determined by logical.
For choice.
Sorry, I don't.
Do we have the capacity to choose to do the resolution?
Let's make it clear. Every decision we make is influenced by particles in our body.
Okay.
There is no soul inside of us that determines what we do, right?
Is it that we are influenced by external considerations, or that we are determined by external considerations?
I mean, if the second one is a more extreme version of the first, it's just the second one, right? It's everything we do is influenced by everything around us.
So how do we have the ability to choose to maximize happiness?
Well, the argument is just the state of affairs in which you do the resolution is a better state of affairs in which you do not do the resolution.
Okay, but we don't have the capacity to make a choice to bring about the state of affairs of the resolution.
I mean, it would be better if the resolution turned out in the AF way than the neg way, right?
Okay, that's fine.
It ought to happen that there is a UBI.
Okay, so your argument is that it's about desirability, but you don't argue that the government would have the capacity to bring about the state of affairs of the resolution.
I mean, they have the capacity in the sense that all the lawmakers would get together and pass the law, right? But none of them individually has free will. Okay,
that's fine. Let's talk about... What's the methodology for Santon 16?
Santon 16. Well, it's hard to give a general methodology because he talks about 6 different ways it reduces inequality. So I could go through each one though.
Starting prep. The order will be NC one-off case.
All right, I'm ready.
Human beings cannot reject their personality and ability to be free. Reducing individuals to mere means makes ethics incoherent. Con, a human cannot renounce her personality. It is a contradiction that she should freely act as if no authorization were needed for action. To annihilate the subject of morality is to root out existence of morality from the world. Disposing of oneself as a mere means is debasing humanity. And human freedom necessitates a minimal state that respects self-ownership. Taxing redistributive policies amount to unjust acquirement of the fruits of one's labor. Feaser. A human being with self-awareness, free will, and possibility of formulating a plan of life cannot be treated as a mere thing. Individuals own themselves. Self-ownership would rule out slavery as illegitimate, since each cannot be owned by anyone else. Libertarians would argue unless one accepts the thesis, one has no way of explaining why slavery is evil, since a kind-hearted slave owner would still be a slaveholder. Slavery is immoral because it involves the kind of stealing of a person from himself. You have a right to determine whether and how you will use your body and its powers. Taxation of the redistributive sort amounts to a kind of forced labor to partial slavery, for in giving every citizen an entitlement to certain benefits, the state gives them an entitlement to a part of the proceeds of your labor. The various programs of the modern liberal welfare state are immoral because they make slaves of the citizens of such a state. The only state that can be morally justified is a minimal state. Thus, the standard is consistency with the minimal state. Clarification: the framework is not concerned with the availability of ends, but a right to pursue them. But I do not wrong you by buying the last jar of peanut butter before you go to the store, leaving you to decide between the inferior jelly or marmalade. I violate if I legislate that you have no right to attempt to purchase peanut butter, as that subverts the end to which you can direct your will. And I contend that UBI is an ill-targeted policy that requires loads of taxation, wastes money, and violates freedom. Kaplan. Forced charity is unjust. The UBI is worse than the SQO. The SQO makes some effort to target people who can't help themselves. The idea is to give money to everyone, whether they need it or not. A wasteful form of forced charity. Given an unconditional grant wastes an enormous amount of money. Switching to a UBI will expand perverse effects of welfare state to the entire population. If taxes rise, the population-wide disincentive, or even worse, UBI would be expensive. Libertarianism is not about the freedom to be coercively supported by strangers. Next off. A is the counterplan text. The United States ought to require employees to pay a living wage. It competes through net benefits. Living wage laws are helpful in lifting low-wage individuals from poverty. Ferris et al. 5. Living wage policies have proliferated across the country. Our findings suggest that the living wage ordinances can provide tangible benefits to workers in poor and low-income families with small negative impacts. Living wage workers are likely to be low income. Living wage workers are likely to be female, African American, and single parents, and prefer it. It's the first study of its kind. Ferris et al. 5. This study is the first to combine a random sample survey, a control group analysis, and a match firm and worked as data set. These elements make us confident that our survey results both isolate the effects of the living wage and accurately represent the experience of living wage workers. Case. First, start on Sinababu. 1. Moral knowledge must be a product of a priori reasoning, otherwise ethics fails to be normative. Lewis. On the naturalistic view, what we should speak of as thoughts are the last link of a causal chain in which links were irrational. If strict naturalism is right, he was enjoying conscious reflection of determined events. It would be impossible to accept naturalism if we believe naturalism, since naturalism is a system of thought. But for naturalism, all thoughts are mere events with irrational causes. That also takes out your determinism argument, since if we don't have the ability to have some sort of causal interaction with the external world, then we cannot choose to believe certain arguments are true, which means that determinism is circular. Second, consequentialism leads to absurd ethical conclusions. For instance, a 5-year-old who accidentally kills a starving woman with food she's allergic to did something just as bad as a malicious murderer. 3 point. Consequentialism destroys the concept of responsibility and desert given the high opportunity cost of everyday activities. Failing to devote yourself night and day to maximizing others' happiness renders one a moral monster, destroying any capacity to properly situate moral intuitions. 4 point. Consequentialism, even when it gives intuitive answers, intuitively gives them to us for the wrong reason. It explains personal concerns such as for one's children in a distant, impersonal one, as when I help a friend for the sake of disembodied utility and not for the friend's unique status. 5. Isaac Gap. The framework cannot bridge the gap between a description of the good and a normative statement about how we ought to respond to it. My NC solves by finding ethics in the nature of action itself. Failing to respect freedom would contradict, since we would be choosing not to look to the nature of agency, which is what enables us to make ethical assessments. 6. The AC is obviously insufficient, since it just says that we can, through intuition, find things like pleasure to be intrinsically valuable, but there are also things external to that. For example, we think that certain people are praiseworthy for doing the right thing or having correct intentions, which means that your framework is insufficient to deal with the complexity of ethics. Now, off of Olson, 1 point. Identity is contextualized by our ability to will ends over time, which unifies us. Wood on ficta. We require concepts of the I as acting. Being an active I finds itself willing against a material world on which it acts present at every point at which the I finds itself. The I's awareness of itself as active is his awareness of its activity is the determinant activity of this I. 2 point. This framework relies on political philosophy, not moral philosophy, not political philosophy. Even if our desires and wants change over time, their external, consistent act of willing freedom unifies us into one coherent identity. 3 point. There is no space to imply util. Reductionism is either weak enough to allow other theories, or so strong that there is no space, for ethics, since we do not have the capacity to make ethical choices at all. Skip the card. Off of Drescher. 1. It is impossible to accept determinism if we believed it, because saying that it is true relies on a system of thoughts that would merely be part of a causal chain, the brain behaving in a certain way, not proving anything is rationally justified. 2. Determinism focuses on the particular ends an individual chooses to set, not on their capacity to choose them. Thus, this doesn't answer the NC, since structural limitations on freedom are still problematic. Go to the 4 point. If determinism is true, vote negative, since every action, including the resolution, is predetermined, so we cannot be obligated to do anything. Off of Synod Armstrong. Action is not differentiated between enablers and action. Action is formed by its explanatory whole, and thus there is no essential distinction between the enabler to an action and the action itself. Ansco. A person can be doing something which she does not do. We say that something was falling over but did not fall. The break between he is whying when he has mentioned why in answer to the question, why are you Xing? And one where she is where we say rather he is going to why. There is not much to choose between she is making tea and she is putting on the kettle in order to make tea. Divisions are simply equivalent. Now go to the contention. First, universal basic income decreases wages of most workers and creates weird work incentives according to economic theory. Harvey 6. Increase in tax requires to implement either a UBI would reduce wage rates for workers. The substitution effective program should cause labor force participants to want to work less. This would be enhanced for low-income workers by the program's income effects. A UBI would increase income of persons with incomes below the break-even level, while reducing real income of persons with incomes above. A conventional analysis would predict the gainers would at least part of their additional income. A BIG should encourage higher-income workers to work more and lower-income workers to work less. Now, also, UBI entrenches the sexual division of labor by incentivizing women to succumb to the social role of caregiver. Danaher 14. Traditional forms of female labor have been decommodified. Women are dependent on occupying that role, which gives rise to sexual division of labor. May re-entrench sexual division if women no longer need to work out of economic necessity. They may succumb to social pressure to take up caregiver role. Men could free ride on unpaid work of women, and women could be further excluded. Off of your global warming card presumes a consequentialist analysis, but if I win that intentions matter, then that would preclude your argument.
Okay. You ready?
Yeah. Do you want me to delete that?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so the very last argument you made, you said that the Brunin card presumes consequentialism. So, to be clear, underneath the NC, we cannot aggregate freedom violations.
Right.
So, what does your Kaplan card mean when it says that the status quo is better than the UBI?
So the argument is that, like, in a world in which we establish a UBI, then we're not allocating funds to, like, individuals who need them most in society. It's just a general violation of freedom in which, like, individuals have to pay for other people to receive money.
Why is that worse than the status quo, which has a mess of welfare programs?
Okay, so the first argument is that the NC has a distinction between foreseen consequences and intended ones. So even if there are problems in the status quo, like, it's not a question of whether or not
I don't think you warrant the intent foresight distinction anywhere in the NC.
like, I didn't explicitly say intent foresight distinction.
Got it.
But all of the arguments for why, like, aggregation doesn't matter for
yes. Okay, where do you warrant why the UBI would require additional raising taxes as opposed to the redistribution of taxes?
Well, it doesn't matter. The argument is that, like, when you allocate taxation for this specific purpose that is unjust, then that would be problematic.
Okay, what's the status of the counterplan?
Conditional.
All right, so let's talk about the Ferris-Sedal 05 evidence.
Sure.
Yeah, wait, so where exactly were they studying? Wait, also, you just tag it as it's the preferred because it's the first study of its kind. Why does something being the first study of its kind mean that it's the best?
Because it's a unique form of analysis that is able to capture certain factors that other statistics weren't able to take into account.
Which factors?
So it's a random sample survey, which focuses on firms and worker data
Sorry,
sets.
no other study has ever done a random sample before when studying the living wage?
No, of affected firms and workers.
That doesn't seem right. No study has ever taken a random sample from people affected by living wage. Okay, that's fine. We'll move on. The comment card, you say a human being can't renounce their personality. Why is this?
Well, so the argument is that, like, if you were to reject their, like, moral personality and their ability to be free, then we couldn't have a coherent ethical theory.
Why? Doesn't that presume that ethics has to be based on who you are in the first place?
No, so the argument is that, like, ethics has to be based on who we are. So the claim is, like, if there is no subject of morality and person for whom things are good and things are bad,
why does there have to be? Why does morality have to have a subject? Couldn't it just be states of affairs like the AF? Where does the con evidence warrant why a state of affairs based approach to morality is not as good as a subject?
So the argument is that that's the only way we can have a coherent link between states of affairs and the obligation for individuals to bring those states of affairs about, because that's the only way we see the requirement for there being some sort of authorization.
Why does it have to be human beings? Why? Like, why does it matter?
I don't really understand.
Okay, that's fine. All right, I'll start prep now. Okay. Is everyone ready? The order's going to be the AF top down, then the NC, then the counterplan, then the NC. So it's a little different than it is in the doc. Is everyone ready?
Just wait 1 second. Okay, yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Overview to the framework debate. First of all, I will concede every single response she makes to every other framework standard. I will only go for the Sinababu evidence. This outweighs all of her warrants because she has conceded she has made a lot of generic consequentialism answers, but not contested the internal warrant in Sinababu. The argument here is that every other traditional type of ethical reasoning, including Kantianism, has historically led to horrific conclusions. For example, people use Kantian ethics and rationality-based ethics like the NC to justify why black people shouldn't be considered people because they were irrational, which is a horrible conclusion, which means that the only trustworthy way to arrive at a sound ethical theory is by basing it on your gut intuitions. This is a different kind of intuition that she talks about when she's line by line in the framework. Rather, it's phenomenal introspection, which is just the raw experiential feeling that you get when you feel pain. You get a sense that things are worse, which means that this delinks all of her intuitions cards, because my argument is not that it conforms with our rational intuitions, but rather that we have a gut feeling that pleasure is a good thing when it happens to us and pain is a bad thing. The second argument here is reject all of your intuition arguments. The ace of point is that intuitions will inevitably conflict. If I have an intuition for something and you have an intuition for the other thing, there's no way to weigh between them. The beast point is that they're unverifiable. You can never confirm what your intuition is or weigh it against someone else because they're inherently subjective mental states, which means that every argument she makes why util is unintuitive should be scratched off the floor because as long as it coheres with phenomenal introspection, I win the debate. Off the Lewis card, I don't defend naturalism. This responds to determinism, but not to Sinababu. Off the second card, you say that group this with the third, fourth, and sixth argument because they're all based on intuitions. But my argument is that pain is the only source of value, which means that you should accept it. Now you say that there's no responsibility. No, we have lots of responsibility. You have responsibilities to constantly be making the world a better place. That's not a bad thing, though. It's a good thing because it means that there will be lots of increased happiness. You say it makes us do things for the wrong reason. That begs the question of what wrong means in the first place, which only the AC is contextually defining. Now the inequality contention. Extend the sentence 16 evidence, which indicates that income inequality is reduced by the AF because it would extend the last one in the card, which is that it would increase political power that the poor have, which means that it would outweigh campaign donations. This outweighs all of your terms because it would ensure that more liberal policies could be passed in the future, which means that it outweighs on longevity. Now, off the Harvey evidence, first of all, there's no impact of this card. It just said the lower income people would do less work. That's not necessarily a bad thing as long as they have enough money to survive. And the second point is that political power outweighs and controls the internal link because we can set more higher taxes later, which would solve now if the Donner 14 evidence. A basic income would fight against the patriarchy, which turns and outweighs your offense. Payment 4. Basic income would give citizens the freedom to not be employed. The opportunities provided by basic income would be far wider since the new opportunities would not be confined by the competitive market. A basic income would make it possible for everyone to go back to school by opening up the range of opportunities and uncoupling income from standard life employment. A basic income has the potential both to encourage critical reassessment of the mutually reinforcing structures of marriage and to open up the possibility that the institutions can be remade in a new democratic form. Cut the card at democratic now. Extend the impact scenario. She's considered this is key to economy, which is key to preventing war. Now the counterplan. Permutation do both have a living wage and a universal basic income. Also, this bites into the NC because if you take people's wages, that's the same thing as stealing their labor according to the NC framework. A large consensus of studies confirm minimum wage hikes cause unemployment. Prefer this to your study because it's a meta-study, which means it encompasses yours. Also, there's no reason why your study being unique is necessarily better. Lots of studies have done random sampling. New Mark 14. An extensive review of new evidence looked at more than 100 studies focusing on the least skilled were highlighted. Nearly 2/3 of the studies estimated that minimum wage had negative effects on employment. Of the 33 studies judged most credible, 85% pointed to the negative employment effects. And raising minimum wage won't make a dent in inequality. Worse all 13. Many jobs are not low income, even though they may be low pay. 50% of those who get paid minimum wage earn more than it. They are tipped. 50% or 24 or under. Changing wages paid isn't going to change inequality very much. Now the NC. The Kant evidence is circular. It says that in order to have a subject-based conception of morality, you cannot destroy the subject, but that assumes that we can't have a states of affairs-based system in the first place, which didn't work. Now the phaser card you should reject because it makes an offensive comparison between the slavery that blacks suffered in America and also the slavery that rich white men pay when they have to buy into welfare programs. Now off the minimal state argument, I link into this because we can still have an extremely minimal state, but just add one more welfare policy. You say that there's not more arguments. The status quo is just as bad as the NC because it's just as bad as the UBI because you cannot weigh different freedom violations according to the NC. Their card says that the UBI is worse than the SQO, but the idea of worse implies consequentials in the first place. My argument is that if it is truly impossible to weigh, then there should be no difference between the NC and the UBI. It's all an infinite violation of freedom, in which case you would just vote AF on a risk of the AF offense.
Okay, the order will be in overview, which you can flow on the NC, then NC, AC.
No counterplan?
No counterplan. Okay, when you're good?
Yeah.
Overview, the counterplan was conditional, so I will kick out of it and just go for the NC. The problem with the 1AR is that the entirety of the arguments that he is making rely on an intuitive claim about what counts as a moral atrocity, while also saying that we cannot look at intuitions as they inherently contradict. Look, Jack is in a double bind, because if we care about intuitions, then he has conceded literally every single argument about why util is horrific if we appeal to them. But then if you don't look to intuitions, then all of his arguments about what counts as an atrocity would just be functioning in a vacuum, which means that you have to look to the NC. So now starting on the NC. Extend Kant that human beings cannot reject their personality and their ability to be free. Reducing individuals to mere means makes ethics incoherent. Jack misunderstands the argument. The claim is not that in order to have a person-based conception of ethics, we must look to people, but rather that in order for us to even care about ethical standards, we must care about them because they apply to specific people. For example, the Sinababu card says that individuals experience happiness as valuable to them, which means that we care about their experience, which means that they must have some sort of ability, some sort of value in morality, otherwise their sort of judgments would not have any relevancy, which means that a point I outweigh, since my framework controls the internal length here, is the only way that we can say that individuals' intuitions matter is to say that individuals are valuable in making those sorts of assessments. You have no coherent counter claim of how we would ground ethics and why we would care about states of affairs absent the individuals that are experiencing them. For example, in a world in which there is a lot of happiness but no one, happy conditions but no one to experience it, then obviously a utilitarian would not say that that sort of situation would be desirable. 3-pointed outweighs since it lays on strength of link to the resolution. Since you have conceded, the only way in which we can say that individuals are obligated to do things is if we require some sort of authorization for action. But to require authorization for action would say that individuals are morally responsible, which means that they are held to moral standards. The only way to do that is to say that they are not mere means, but rather are inherently valuable, which means that we cannot instrumentalize them. That takes out all of the arguments about how consequentialism interaction with the NC, because we care about since we care about intentions to violate other people's freedom rather than the state of affairs that is brought about, which also would take out your arguments about why the status quo would inherently, about how the status quo would link into the counterplans. It's a question of the action we are taking and the maxim that we were acting on, which would not be to be complicit with problems in the status quo, but rather not to be complicit in another one. Now extend Fieser that human freedom necessitates a minimal space that respects self-ownership. Taxing redistributive policies amount to an unjust requirement of the fruits of one labor. Your argument is ridiculous. You say that this is an offensive comparison. No, it's literally a definition of what it constitutes. It's literally a definition of what it constitutes for someone to be stealing one's labor from someone if they are using it without their consent. There is no. It also, you've conceded the argument that the only way that we can understand the wrongness of slavery is by looking to a libertarian standard. This is not a question of the way in which the slave owner is treating the slave, but rather the condition of ownership. That also here is a super big framing issue. The one argument that the 1AR is going for is that certain frameworks have been misappropriated to justify things like slavery being bad. But he says we cannot look to intuitions. We have to look to a theory that explains why certain things are right or wrong. But the NC you have conceded is the only way that we can make sense of the badness of slavery, which means that the AC could hypothetically be used to justify slavery, which is also historically proven to have happened, since people would justify it for economic benefits, which means that even if you're looking to his pseudo-intuitionist arguments about the way in which ethical standards are used, you would still vote negative. Now, extend the Kaplan evidence that UBI is an ill-targeted policy that requires loads of taxation, wastes money, and violates freedom. Now, now framing issue. The framing of the NC is what is. It's not the argument. The arguments in CX were not about how we do not instrumentalize individuals for some sort of future consequence, which means that when we instrumentalize individuals by taxing them from a universal basic income, that is a comparable bad thing. It's just a question of whether or not we should take the action of the app, not about state of affairs. If I win the NC, which means that its state of affairs arguments about the status quo are just simply not responsive. Now, now on the AC. Here, one framing issue. Jack kicks out of some of the framework warrants without actual, but I have offense on them, which means that is a sufficient reason to vote for the negative framework. So go to Olson. Extend that word on ficta that identity is contextualized by our ability to will ends over time, which unifies us. That's the only coherent account of who we are as moral agents, which is necessary for the way in which we perceive ethics, since we are the ones that are taking action. Insofar as utilitarianism is an incorrect ethical theory to make sense of the way we act as moral actors, and that cannot prescribe the way in which cannot prescribe any sort of action, which means that I definitely function on the highest level to the absence. You just make arguments about things that are desirable, but not whether or not individuals are obligated to bring about that state of affairs, which means that the NC functions on a higher level now than Babu. First, extend the fifth argument that this cannot bridge the auto gap because it cannot bridge it between a description of the good and a normative statement about how we ought to respond to it. The NC solves by finding ethics in the nature of action itself, failing to respect freedom when contradicts, since we would be choosing not to look to the system that enables us to even have values in the first place. That outweighs all of your arguments, since you just make an intuitive claim. I will concede your arguments that intuitions do not matter, but that you're making an intuitive claim that the fact that we think something is valuable to us means that it is normative, which is a gap that you do not have the capacity to make, which outweighs your framework on the highest level, because only I bridge the gap between what we are obligated to do and what is descriptively good. Look, this round breaks down super simply. The highest level is that I am winning arguments about the way in which we are as moral agents, which functions on a higher level than all of the AF arguments, because it prescribes the way in which we can even engage in moral obligations in the first place. Even if I don't win that argument, then I have claims about how the AF inherently relies on intuitionism, which he says that you can do.
Okay, 231 starting now. Okay, the order is going to be round overview, very briefly on the AF contention, and then on the NC. Is everyone ready? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. That 2NR sounded very good until you realized that almost all of her round winners were entirely new in the 2NR. I will concede that the NC has a higher probability of truth than the AF. Unfortunately, she spends almost no time winning her contention level offense. I'll decisively win that she has 0 offense underneath the NC, in which case you'll have no choice but to vote on a risk of offense on the AF. So go to the income inequality advantage on the AF. She has completely conceded, extended reducing income inequality through increasing the political power of the poor is the only way to improve the economy and avoid war. Now go to the NC. Okay. Again, I will concede that her framework is more likely to be true, but go down to the contention where she definitely doesn't spend enough time. Remember here, the status quo is just as bad. You cannot weigh freedom violations. I will concede that consequentialism is flawed, which means that there is literally no way to weigh between whether or not the status quo is better than the UBI. There are 2 reasons for this. Subpoint A is that she never makes an argument for why the AF would involve raising taxes as opposed to just changing where the taxes come from, which means that she has 0 argument. There's a missing internal link in the NC for why the AF would have any larger kind of freedom violation. The B subpoint here is that according to the NC, you cannot weigh between freedom violations because they're functionally infinite and they don't operate on a consequentialist layer. Because of this, that means that it is literally impossible for her to be make a claim that says that the status quo is preferable to the AF, because there is no way to weigh what preferable means in the context of the NC versus the AC. This means if I win that the status quo is not preferable to the AF in terms of the NC framework, you would have 0 choice but to vote on either A, risk of offense on the AC that you might think that war is a bad thing, or B, on presumption, and I'll make presume AF arguments. Now, let's start on the arguments she makes in response to my argument on Kaplan. She says that it's just about the maximum we're acting on. Here's the first place where she makes an argument that is just completely new. She just because you read a content C doesn't mean that everyone's going to fill in the maxim arguments for you. The NC says nothing about how it only cares about maxims. She never warrants anything about the act omission distinction or the intent foresight distinction. Even if she did, she doesn't extend any of those arguments in the 2NR, which means that you should not pretend that she's made some kind of Kantian act omission distinction argument when that argument was not present in the NC or the NR. What this means is that you should not pretend that there is a distinction between acting and omitting. She even says this in the 2NR when she says, I'll kick the counter plan and just advocate the status quo, making an implicit endorsement of the argument and deciding to take the action of the status quo, which means that there's no reason why you prefer the NC over the AF on that layer. Now, she says that it's just a question of whether or not we do the AF, but again, that relies on a false dichotomy between doing and omitting, which she has never warranted in the entirety of the debate round. That means you have to either A, vote on the risk of the AF offense on a presumption that war might have at least a semblance of an impact, because there's literally no negative impact to vote on, or B, you might decide that there's no way to adjudicate between the NC and the AC, in which case you would go to presumption. She's not made any presume neg arguments, so I should be able to make presume AF arguments in the 2AR. Presume AF because the ACE point is that you presume the statements are true when people first tell them to you. If I tell you that my name is Jack, you have an initial reason to accept my statement unless someone makes arguments to the contrary. The B-step one is that it's key to offsetting theoretical skew to the fact that the AF has to speak first, give the 1AR, which is a short speech, and sandwiched by 2 longer neg speeches. So, Do not treat any of her new arguments that fit in with the general Kantian theme but weren't warranted in the NC. There's no way to adjudicate the NC contention debate, so you vote F.
Good round.
Good round.